On STC, Google is delaying Flock, so what's happening there? We've got a section on Windows 11 security. We've got Facebook and its purchase of Oculus, and surprisingly, showing us ads. And we've got Apple iMessage, not keeping up with WhatsApp.
So a major backtrack from Chrome this week. We've talked before on STC about Flock, which confuses everybody, but is basically Google trying to get rid of cookies and keep advertisers happy. But now it seems that Google has admitted that it might have got this wrong.
Zach, is this a good move or is this just a hugely embarrassing failure for Google?
This is clearly not what they expected to be doing at this point. So the sense you got was Flock had come out of the privacy sandbox. It was they were doing what they called the origin trial, where they were secretly enrolling people around the world in this trial to see how it worked, running it in tandem with cookies. And then the sense was they were going to seamlessly move into kind of Flock going into production.
Kind of surprised by this, Zach, because they were so kind of stringent on what they were doing, what was going to happen, when it was going to happen, despite the backlash. What's changed?
Flock did something that not many other things has managed to do, which is to unify the entire technology world against a particular technology. It was badly conceived. Let's be very clear, because the exceptions in terms of how Flock works, which in essence is anonymized tracking of your browser behaviors, so the exceptions in terms of what it could actually find out about you were not properly dealt with. But more importantly, we again, something we've talked about in STC over and over, the advertising industry is very smart, and the data brokers that track us around are very smart. And Flock might have worked well in the laboratory, but as soon as you put it into the real world, then clearly it's open to exploitation and comparison with other trackers and identifiers to try and work out who you are and potentially know more about you. So I think it's an example of, you know, it kind of got out too soon, and it hadn't really been thought through the way it needed to be.
We knew that there were regulatory problems in Europe with GDPR, for example, and the origin trial was done in the States. Is this now going to be the death of Flock, do you think? Do you think they're going to be able to come back at all, or is it finished?
I think Flock will need to be adjusted or changed in how it works. I think clearly the GDPR is part of it, but and Flock hasn't been tested, if you like, in GDPR locations. But I think, and it was interesting, we got some comments from others in the industry, including Brave, who were quite happy to talk about, I have been happy to talk about Flock's issues, and we're happy to talk about Google's backtrack as well. So we've got some interesting comments from those guys. Google's in a bind, right? Because it can talk all it likes about privacy sandboxes and a privacy first web. It's the world's largest digital advertising corporation, right? It makes its money by, you know, accessing and monetizing your data. So it's trying to, you know, as Brave says, it's trying to, you know, push out this privacy message while keeping advertisers happy. And it might just be that is an impossible puzzle to solve. And it'd be really interesting to see where they go next, given how staunch the backlash against Flock has been and how universal it's been.
Yeah, when you're Google, it's really hard to actually purvey yourself as somebody who is very privacy focused. It goes against their whole ethos. What's been spending, you know, they've been spending years and years building up as an ad company. You don't suddenly care about privacy unless you're threatened by it. And the only reason you're threatened by it is because you've got people like Apple on the other side pushing.
Google saying one thing and now doing another. This links in quite well, I think, with Microsoft, because Microsoft, almost 6 years ago to the day, I mean, you know, end of July 2015, launched the last version of Windows ever, which was Windows 10, which was also the, also the most secure version of Windows ever. And guess what? Now we've got Windows 11 coming, which is going to be the most secure version of Windows ever.
Well, this seems to have happened quite quickly, because, you know, we've gone from, you know, talking about, you know, monthly Windows 10 issues, and then suddenly Windows 11 is coming out, you know, pretty quickly. We're seeing leaks, we're seeing screenshots, we're seeing reviews, we're seeing analysis of the security side. You know, we were not expecting to be spending all of this time analyzing Windows 11 and Microsoft's changes, but I guess it's chasing Apple and Google into the market, right, and trying to work out how it catches up with some of their, you know, browsing and user services.
I mean, the biggest issue online that's provoked debate is what I call the TPM kerfuffle, because Windows 11, which won't actually be launched as a free upgrade until next year now, although you can download a version and get it running to test it out, needs a trusted platform module in order to install. Now, specifically TPM2, which replaced the previous TPM 1.2 standard in 2019, which has led to this huge debate online as to whether Microsoft is essentially making all computers that aren't a couple of years old redundant. Truth be told, most computers can have their older TPM module upgraded by a firmware update rather than having to stick additional hardware in. TPM isn't that big a move forward. The biggest problem has been Microsoft's Windows 11 compatibility checker that it threw out a bit too soon without thinking, because it wasn't giving you any real reason, wasn't digging into the reasons why you couldn't run Windows 11. It was leading to more confusion. So that they've withdrawn that now. But if you want to know if you've got a TPM2 chip in your computer, just go to Device Manager, expand the security device option, and you'll see it. It'll tell you there. So that's the get around for that.
What if you don't have it? Is there another way of being able to upgrade to Windows 11 without it? Or, I mean, can you modify your own PC?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, there is. And if you search online, you'll find plenty of people telling you how to do that. But I don't think it's a good idea. And the reason I don't think it's a good idea to do that is we need to look at what the trusted platform module is. Now, a TPM is all about secure storage of and access to cryptographic keys. Windows 10 Professional already requires a TPM if you want to use BitLocker full disk encryption, for example. So you boot up your computer, the TPM supplies the key to unlock the encryption, and that allows Windows to start up properly. A Windows system architect that I spoke to about this for my article said that Microsoft's attempted to control the controllable, which is a good way of putting it. It's adopting a standard hardware baseline that reduces the pool of hardware configurations or potential hardware configurations, and therefore potential security problems, which is a bit like, well, Apple, if you think about it. So skipping back to try and avoid that isn't a great idea, because we should be looking at improving security and those security baselines where we can.
It's interesting, I know there's been some talk that maybe we're going to see again a bit more of a battle between Apple and Microsoft moving forwards as everything starts to converge. And it was interesting that the Windows 11 Android news and, Microsoft cheekily suggesting that it would be good if Apple put iMessage onto Microsoft's platform as well. But I guess, as a user, we've seen, the big Apple software announcements for the fall that have just come out, and that's all about usability and features and shiny stuff. And we'll discover all the issues later, but it was very much a pizzazzy Hollywood-style announcement of all the new exciting stuff. Windows 11 seems to have been caught up in this very complicated debate about, is your computer good enough to have this upgrade, and some of the technical stuff that's in there. Has Microsoft kind of losing out in this in terms of just engaging with its user base?
Yeah, it's not surprising, really. I don't think they have a great track record in doing so. A good example would be Microsoft's Director of Enterprise and OS Security wrote a blog a couple of days ago trying to get the focus back onto security. And he wrote in there that PCs of the future need this modern hardware root of trust to help protect from, and his words were, both common and sophisticated attacks like ransomware, and more sophisticated attacks from nation states. Now, this to me is the ransomware thing is a huge red herring. There's possibly an argument to be made that a vendor-controlled desktop experience will reduce some ransomware. But to be honest, I'm struggling to see how it's a major defense, to be honest. And I can't really think of any ransomware attacks offhand that would have been prevented by the use of TPM2. This booting up scenario of firmware and bootloader attacks is a valid one, but it's a very limited defense. If malware has already compromised the system, yeah, it might stop it spreading further, but it doesn't address the bigger issue of live user interaction. So phishing leading to malware download or credential compromise. So I think in a way, Microsoft is still shooting itself in the foot with this one.
Moving on from bending the truth to another company that is also known for bending the truth perhaps a little more often. I'm going to talk about Facebook buying Oculus and recently announcing that Oculus is actually testing ads for users of its headsets. So basically, people have been very annoyed when they found this out. One of the games companies that was actually signed up to be part of the trial has pulled out after it says poor feedback from users and saying it probably won't work for it after all. Now, Facebook bought Oculus in 2014. It said, well, the Oculus founder said at the time, there aren't going to be ads in Oculus. You're not going to have to sign in to Facebook to use Oculus. Gradually, we're seeing all of these promises, much like when Facebook bought WhatsApp, being retracted and being changed. Are we surprised?
You know, and I know we talk about on this episode, we're talking about Google as well. I mean, ultimately follow the money, right? You know, if Facebook's business model is around your data and sending you ads, and Google's browser model is about serving you ads and understanding who you are, then everyone throwing their hands up aghast when these huge tech trillion-dollar organizations do exactly what they're doing to maintain their trillion-dollar organization status. Who's surprised? Who clearly can be surprised anymore at this stuff?
I've bought into the Oculus Quest 2, and I did so knowing full well that you need a Facebook account to use this thing. So I know that my data's there. I'm a Facebook user. I haven't given up on Facebook. I'm well aware of that. And I was prepared to do that because Oculus Quest 2 is by far the cheapest and best way in at that price point into VR. And it's a great device. So I'm not surprised at that move. Am I surprised at the advertising move? No, but I think it's a very bad one. As a user, if I'm buying software to run on my Oculus 2, and let's face it, it's not cheap, the software in the VR world, I don't expect then to be subjected to advertising within that software. That's really not on.
Because you are paying for it anyway. But I've heard talk that, well, because the Oculus itself is quite a low price point, it has to be monetized in some way by Facebook, and that is how they're doing it. So I can't see this being backtracked as a whole unless all of the games makers opt out. Maybe that will happen in result of user backlash, but you know, at the moment they're going to push it through, which they do with everything.
Yeah, I can see the developers going two ways on this. I think that games that you have to pay for, that aren't cheap, no advertising. I can see developers saying that because they are going to get trashed by their users otherwise. We already saw that when there was one particular game that was supposed to be used initially for this, when that news broke, the reviews just got bombed. And there were all these one-star reviews saying what a terrible, terrible game it is. Those developers will think differently for free games. And I can see free games being, having in-game advertising. I can see that and we accept that in just about everything else with freeware. We accept that advertising to back it up. So maybe that's the way it's going to split.
When it's free, you accept that you are giving your data or you're watching advertising, you're doing something in exchange for that free product. We know that now, don't we? But pay for something and have your privacy taken away, or just have adverts. Adverts are annoying. Having adverts thrown at you when you haven't chosen to do so, when you've paid for a product, is just absolutely ridiculous. And it depends.
It depends on the advert delivery, of course. So I don't think we're talking about you're in the middle of a game and an advert just pops up and interrupts. What we're talking about is in the game lobbies, as the game's starting up, you're in a virtual environment. So you're usually in some 3D VR wraparound lobby. You'll have posters on the wall or a television playing, and they'll be having the adverts on them. So there'll be sort of an immersive part of the experience, which in a way isn't a bad way to do advertising. As long as it doesn't jump in your face, then I'm not too fussed about it.
This is another backlash. It's another Facebook backlash, isn't it? Where, you know, users the world over are taking to Facebook to communicate to their entire social network about how much they dislike what Facebook is doing. Meanwhile, Facebook is capturing the data of who you know, when you message them, what you said, what you bought. Now we know all these people using Oculus. That's great. We can message them with different ads. It's a great business model these guys have come up with, right?
Oh, the whole Facebook ecosystem. And also we heard this week that Facebook is now $1 trillion company. So like Apple, Facebook is now worth $1 trillion. Absolutely insane. And the difference between their two business models is just so vast. It's amazing. So we've got, on the one hand, we buy into Facebook, we give Facebook all of our data. On the other hand, we pay for privacy with Apple, arguably with some caveats, because Apple does take our data. But it just makes this kind of whole scene very, very interesting. And this choice that you have to make as a user, who are people going to choose?
Let's go to Apple. And Apple seem to be falling behind, which is unusual for Apple. They're usually perceived as being out there and leading the way with things. They seem to be falling behind on the messaging front at the minute.
Oh, absolutely right. I think there's an irony in, Kane, to your point about Facebook becoming $1 trillion company, because one of the things that's come out of that is the likelihood of Instagram and WhatsApp, those acquisitions being revisited by the regulators has diminished, at least for the time being, as part of, that was the reason they got a share price bump. But what's been really interesting in the last couple of months is WhatsApp has been kind of not separating itself, but presenting a very different set of messages to Facebook in terms of, you know, the safety and security and privacy on WhatsApp. And you're absolutely right, David. And I think there are some implications there where Apple is falling behind WhatsApp, which is not a happy place for Apple to find itself. Essentially, you know, Apple's very keen to tell you that what happens on an iPhone stays on an iPhone, but that's not always a good thing. You know, we've all been using iMessage now for, you know, a decade almost, and there's a lot of stuff buried in there. And not only on your iPhone, but on the iPhones of all of the people that you've been messaging, particularly as groups have taken over, that you probably don't want to see the light of day again. And this kind of managing your online or your messaging legacy is a real issue. So we've seen the real privacy first messages, particularly Signal, has really been on the front foot with automatically deleting ephemeral messaging, essentially. So automatically deleting messages after a period of time. So you can send what you like, and you know that the messages, the text, the memes, the photos, the videos, whatever you're sending is not sitting around forever on all of these cloud backups and all these devices where your exposure, your compromise is you're trusting others. And now we've seen WhatsApp jump on board as well. And it started with disappearing messages, so you can auto-delete texts. It's now thinking about an option where you can automatically do that for all of your chats, so you don't have to apply it to each individual chat, very similar to what Signal does. But really critically now, it's also bringing this kind of vanish mode, view once media. So the idea is that you can send somebody a photo or a video, and once they've viewed it, it deletes. And that is really critical, because the biggest compromises to us all are the memes that we find on social media we send to groups, the videos, the photos that we kind of send out on a whim. Apple has done nothing in this direction at all. And the interesting thing is now WhatsApp, with its 2 billion users, starts to push ephemeral messaging. It becomes the biggest player in that space. Apple's seriously behind. And if this catches on, that could be an issue for iPhone users and encourage them to send some of these messaging using a different platform.
Yeah, there's been a lot of interest in disappearing messages recently, hasn't there? Even if it is just to manage your kind of data estate that you build up with like thousands and thousands of messages to all of your friends. This is a means that we use to communicate with each other. But what kind of people might be missing is there are so many more features on Signal disappearing messages. The time that you can set them to, whether you can set them to happen kind of automatically, all that stuff has been available on Signal, and actually the features have been made much richer recently, haven't they? Isn't this something Apple should have already been doing? WhatsApp seems very limited in itself in comparison to Signal.
Yeah, I think WhatsApp will catch up with Signal because they already have more options on Facebook Messenger, weirdly. So it'll be quite easy for them to set a timer and do some of what Signal's on there. It's not the hardest thing in the world to copy. This is a pure philosophy. You know, Apple's keeping everything on your device, you know, in a very secure architecture. iMessage is fantastic. Its architecture is fantastic. But everything you message over their end-to-end encryption ends up decrypted on all of the iPhones you've messaged to and in the iCloud backups. And we know, we talked about it before on STC, unless you set iCloud up in a certain way, all of those messages in iCloud are accessible to Apple, so they can access your content. The idea of disappearing messages is really good. It is if only it was there from the beginning, we wouldn't all have phones clogged up with messages from years ago. And ironically, one of the best protections you have on iMessage is it's so painful, almost impossible to search your old messages anyway, because it's clunky and it doesn't work. So you go try find something you messaged one of your friends 6 years ago, and if you do, send us a message, because we can't work out how to do it, right? You have to use, you know, forensic technology to pull all of the messages into a data store and mine it that way. So but that isn't good enough. This is really going to send a message, I think, to Apple, and I think they've missed the trick with iOS 15. They've gone after the sharing, you know, your films and your music and your news. They haven't really thought about improving the core messaging features and privacy protections in iMessage itself, and that's a shame. And WhatsApp will clearly be capitalising on that.
It's interesting about disappearing messages that might be worth mentioning is just the fact that people might think that this is a very, very kind of secure way of doing things, which it is, but it doesn't protect you from everything, does it? So it doesn't protect you from spyware, for example. If there's spyware on your phone, your messages can still be read, and therefore they aren't completely private. If you need to communicate in a super, super private way, if you are a dissident or somebody whose, you know, messages could be very valuable to an adversary who might be quite threatening, you shouldn't be using disappearing messages as a caveat, you know, I'm secure now, that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are two security issues with end-to-end encryption and disappearing messages. I think one is it lulls you into a false sense of security. You assume that if you send something, it's encrypted, it's not going to be compromised. We know that once it reaches a phone, it can be compromised. And the other one, to your point, Kate, is it's no big deal for someone to take a screenshot. And there are some apps that warn you if screenshots have been taken, but you know, if you really want to go to these lenses, you could take a photo of the screen on your phone and see it. And there are lots of Snapchat really invented this whole disappearing media concept. And we know there are a load of programs around that would capture the Snapchat and store it. So there were workarounds and that were there. The other one, which is really important, and we do need to mention, is clearly in Snapchat and Instagram have seen this as well. There are huge concerns about whether the idea of disappearing media particularly lends itself to aiding and abetting criminals that are sending inappropriate, dangerous imagery, particularly when it comes to child safety. This was always the issue with Snapchat, that people could send photos and there was no record of them, so you couldn't go back and check to those. And this, I think, drives to something we've talked about in the last few weeks on STC, which is around different messages for different reasons. And I think, again, this highlights, you know, WhatsApp is a person-to-person messenger, you know, albeit with its group functions, used primarily by adults with phones and phone numbers. You can't browse it. You can't look for people to contact on WhatsApp. You need to know who you're talking to. The social media platforms, and I include Facebook and Facebook Messenger and Instagram and Snapchat, are not like that. TikTok as well. You know, it's easier to try and find people there if that's what you're doing. And I think there should be different rules and different safety measures in place for different types of messengers. This is something I think we feel quite strongly about on STC in terms of, you know, not having one size fits all and being sensible about how we apply some of these privacy and security protections that balances safety measures, particularly where children are concerned, with the fundamental human right to privacy that we as, you know, normal functioning adult members of society want to have, where the stuff that we're sending isn't open to being monitored and viewed by third parties.